everyone. I'm so sorry for not being there. Hi everyone. I'm so sorry for not being there today. I've decided not to come because of the coronavirus. But I'm glad everyone's there, and I hope people can actually, listen to this talk and enjoy it. So what I want to talk about today is basically why metatransactions and ETH 1.0 suck and what can we do about it. Some context is that we've been building this service called Any.Sender for the past 6 months. The very straightforward idea. We provide a very simple API. The user will send a meta transaction, give it to us, and our only job is to guarantee this blockchain or this meta transaction gets in the blockchain before a block deadline. And the user will get a signed receipt that promises that we will do it. So we use meta transactions under the hood. So what I want to highlight is that 1, I'm going to go through why Ethereum transactions are painful. 2, how does Any.Sender work? And 3, some of the really awkward quirks that pop up when we try to use meta transactions and how we've done our best to minimize any of the quirks. And finally, what we should do in ETH 1.0 or ETH 2.0 to make meta transactions a native primitive. So let's just get started. Why are transactions painful? So first we have Bob, and Bob's his little cute baby. And Bob wants to vote in a DAO because we all love DAOs nowadays, they're all the rage. So the baby is going to create an Ethereum transaction where they want to vote yes. They'll broadcast that to the Ethereum network. It will eventually get picked up by miners. It'll be in the pending pool. They'll take the transaction out, put it in their block, and they'll confirm the baby's transaction. So that's a very straightforward process in how you can vote in the DAO. And I assume everyone here is probably aware of how that works. So let's look at some of the problems that may arise for our little Bob when they interact with Ethereum. The first problem is that the Ethereum network enforces that all transactions are accepted in order. So if you broadcast 3 transactions, transaction 10, transaction 11, and transaction 20, the nonces in the replay protection must always increment by 1. So in this example, transaction 10 can be accepted, transaction 11 can be accepted, but transaction 20, well, there's 12, 13, 14, 15 that still needs to be accepted. So transaction 20 will just get dropped and it cannot be confirmed on the network. And that's really annoying for Bob or the user because the user now has to be careful what nonce they select. So the second problem is, what if the user wants to send transactions out of order and bypass this network rule? Maybe they want to process 1,000 withdrawals and they don't really care what order they're processed in. To do that, the user has to sign them from n different signing keys, and that's really frustrating. Problem 3, bad transaction fee management. So again, all transactions have to be accepted in the network in order. So if transaction 10 has a really low fee, in this exemplified GWI, and miners are only accepting transactions with 10 GWI or more, then transaction 10 won't get in, transaction 11 won't get in, and transaction 12 won't get in. The user will have to notice this and re-bump the fee for transaction 10 before any transaction can get in. Problem 4, what if transaction 10 just gets dropped by the network? The network's congested, there's a CryptoKitty event, and transaction 10 just drops from the network and the pending pool. If that's the case, then again, transaction 11, transaction 12 can't get in the blockchain. And the user has to republish transaction 10, and that's quite painful. And finally, the last problem is, what if the user has broadcast 100 transactions and then they realize, crap, high priority transaction and a high the user transaction. So the only other solution is that the user has to reorganize all of the pending transactions, bump the fee of all the pending transactions, and include this priority at the top of the queue. And that's hell to do. You never want to do that because there's so many terrible race conditions that also mess up all of your transaction logic. So that sounds really annoying. But surely these problems are academic, and I'm just making all this up. Well, Taylor put up this fantastic tweet storm last week that really highlights some of these problems. So she's talking about the simple story from 2018 with the CryptoKitty boom. The first thing she highlights is that the network was congested and some transactions were being dropped from the pending pool. That's problem 4. If transaction 10 gets dropped, then none of your other transactions in the queue can get accepted. So you have to republish it. And that's so annoying from a business perspective. But of course, Taylor and some others were in a Telegram group, or maybe that's a Skype group, I don't know, with some exchanges. And these exchanges are sending 5 transactions a second at their peak. Now, what they do mention is problem 3. They send a queue of transactions, one has a very low fee, and it stops the rest getting in. What do you do in that scenario? Well, what someone in the chat recommended was exchanges. Just put 250 Giwi as a gas price, and that's definitely going to get in. Everyone else's fee is 100 Giwi, so if you've chosen 250 Giwi, that'll resolve all of your stuck transaction issues. Now, that's pretty annoying that you have to overpay, double what everyone else is paying to make sure your transaction gets in. But actually, exchanges do that today. Still, 2020, Binance regularly pays 40 Giwi, and Huobi pays 35 Giwi, because they don't want stuck transactions. Today when you have to pay 10 Giwi, and you'll definitely get your transaction in, they're paying 40 Giwi just to avoid the off chance that there's congestion and their transaction gets stuck. Now, Nick Johnson was in the chat, and people realized that actually a part of this congestion problem was a bug in Go Ethereum around fee estimation. So Nick patched the bug, he released a new version of Go Ethereum, and he recommended the exchanges download this new version of Go Ethereum. But for exchanges, that's way too risky, because one, they're running parity, so now they've got to swap it to Go Ethereum, and if they have a screw up in these 5 minutes, it's going to cause 12 to 24 hours worth of issues for them. So it's way too high risk for them to just swap their node in between. So in this short story, while it's still a better story than Twilight, there's so many stories like this around dealing with Ethereum transactions. There's loads of examples of high congestion in 2019 with DeFi issues. There's ICOs that were delayed because of the CryptoKitty congestion. 100,000 transactions got stuck last year when Tether joined the network. When you have these crazy gambling games like Fairwin, they use up 50% of all gas on the network. And actually what's also annoying is that some of these transactions are time critical. So DeFi Saver, their whole purpose is to save CDPs for their users. And for the most part, they do an excellent job, and they're still running today. But sometime last year, they had an issue with their transaction infrastructure. So they sent some transactions out. One of the transactions had a low fee. It stopped all the other transactions getting in. Because of this, some of the CDPs got liquidated, and they failed to protect their customers. So they had to refund the customers out of pocket. That was a financial loss, because sending transactions to Ethereum is painful. And the mother of all examples is this one from an ICO in 2017, where the dude paid $71,000 on a transaction fee, and the execution failed. He didn't even get in the ICO. The execution failed, and he still paid $71K. That's just crazy. He needs an intermediary to stop him sending transactions. So the whole point here is that dealing with transactions on Ethereum is painful. Can lead to a bad user experience, and in the worst case, a loss of funds. And I believe Metatransactions can make this so much better. But what is a Metatransaction? Well, a Metatransaction is basically where the user will pre-authorize a command. They say, I care about this contract, I care about this function, here's my signed command, please get this in the blockchain and get this command executed. Now, meta-transactions are typically associated with a gasless transaction. But I think there's so much way useful than just that single use case, and hopefully I'm going to show why now. So the key point is that the user will authorize a meta-transaction, give it to a relayer, and that relayer's only job is to get that in the blockchain ASAP. So what the relayer will do is get the meta-transaction, stick it in their Ethereum transaction, broadcast it to the network, bump the fee, and it will eventually get accepted. And this is exactly what we've built with Any.Sender, the first financially accountable API. We have a very simple API. The user gives us a meta transaction, and we guarantee it gets in the blockchain. So how does this work? Let's go through it step by step. Step 1, the user has to have a balance on the service. The user will simply deposit ETH into relay.sol and the registration process is now complete. Very simple on-chain deposit, very simple registration process. 2, the user can now send jobs to any sender and get a signed receipt in return. So they'll give us a signed Metatransaction, we'll return a signed receipt, and the signed receipt will pretty much promise the transaction will be delivered by block 100, okay, and assigned by any sender. And step 3, sit back and watch as any sender delivers this Metatransaction. What'll happen under the hood is that any sender will relay it, bump the fee, it'll eventually get accepted. It'll first get processed by relay.sol, that'll record a log, and then send out the command to be executed in the user's contract. If there's a good service, everything's good and everyone's really happy. But if any sender provides a lousy service, then the user has up to 3 months to send a signed receipt to a contract called the adjudicator. The adjudicator will get the signed receipt, look at the on-chain logs and say, oh, any sender didn't actually relay the transaction. If so, then any sender must compensate the user a pre-agreed amount in a timely manner. And if any sender doesn't, then a security deposit, which let's say could be $10,000, will simply be slashed and they'll lose their skin in the game. And that's actually what's really cool about any sender. Any sender is a skin in the game service. It's non-custodial. It only relays pre-authorized transactions. It deals with queue management. It deals with bumping fees. And if it doesn't deliver its promised quality of service, you get compensated or we get slashed. So there's on-chain deposit that really demonstrate our commitment to doing this job. Now, while we were designing any sender, we focused on 4 different properties. First, minimal intrusiveness. We don't want people to modify their smart contracts to use our service. And we've tried to minimize that as much as we can. 2, we want to be environmentally friendly. We don't want to have a negative impact on the network state. 3, we want to do much better than Ethereum today, and we want to support out-of-order transactions. We have some really cool replay protection to do that. And finally, fair payments. The relayer should really take on no risk when relaying this transaction. The relayer should always get paid for the job. So now that I've spoken about why transactions are painful on Ethereum and how any sender works, now let's talk about some of the gotchas with Metatransactions. I mean, this applies for all Metatransaction relayers and not just us, but it's really important to bring up. So let the fun begin. And the biggest issue is message.sender. Why is that? So if you remember, we get a Metatransaction, we stick it in an Ethereum transaction, and we broadcast that to the network. So the DApp cannot use message.sender immediately. They use message.sender, they'll get our address. They won't get the user's address. Pretty annoying, so how do we get around that problem? One approach is to modify the smart contract, the DApp, so it'll check the user's signature, fetch the signer's address, and then use that to check if this voter is registered to vote. But can you see a problem there? The problem is replay protection. There's no replay protection whatsoever. So I could take the user's Metatransaction and relay this several times to the network. And it'll get processed every time. For example, it's fine. But if this is like a financial contract and you're relaying transfers, withdrawals, that's huge risk because I could keep sending Bob 1 coin by replaying this Metatransaction. So now what you would have to do is modify the contract, verify the user's signature, enforce replay protection, and then execute the command. And that's pretty damn invasive. We want to try to avoid this as much as we can. So the easiest way to avoid it is to have a simple proxy contract in the middle. So the Metatransaction will go via the proxy contract. It will check the signature, check the replay protection, and then call out to the DApp and then process the command. And now you can use message.sender because it's a proxy account. And a bunch of projects have already done this, which is fantastic, and we can reuse a lot of that out of the box for ourselves. Now, you may think as a DApp developer, well, I like message.sender. But I also want to support signer's addresses. I can use message.sender, I could use the signer's address, I don't care. Is there a really easy way to do that? There is a way to do it. It's proposed by the GSN, and it's a little bit hacky. So let's talk about it, okay? So what happens is that the account proxy, so we'll send the command again, the Metatransactions via the proxy. The proxy will call out with the data in the command, but it will also append 20 bytes, which is the signer's address. And that will get sent to the DApp. Interestingly, the DApp will not process issue is message.sender. Why is that? So if you remember, we get a meta transaction, we stick it in an Ethereum transaction, and we broadcast that to the network. So the DApp cannot use message.sender immediately. They use message.sender, they'll get our address. They won't get the user's address. That's pretty annoying. So how do we get around that problem? One approach is to modify the smart contract, the DApp, so it'll check the user's signature, fetch the signer's address, and then use that to check if this voter is registered to vote. But can you see a problem there? The problem is replay protection. There's no replay protection whatsoever. So I could take the user's meta transaction and relay this several times to the network, and it'll get processed every time. For example, it's fine, but if this is like a financial contract and you're relaying transfers, withdrawals, that's huge risk, because I could keep sending Bob one coin by replaying this meta transaction. So now what you would have to do is modify the contract, verify the user's signature, enforce replay protection, and then execute the command. And that's pretty damn invasive. We want to try to avoid this as much as we can. So the easiest way to avoid it is to have a simple proxy contract in the middle. So the meta transaction will go by the proxy contract. It'll check the signature, check the replay protection, and then call out to the DApp and then process the command. And now you can use message.sender because it's a proxy account. And a bunch of projects have already done this, which is fantastic, and we can reuse a lot of that out of the box for ourselves. Now, you may think as a DApp developer, well, I like message.sender, but I also want to support signer's addresses. I can use message.sender, I can use the signer's address, I don't care. There's a really easy way to do that. There is a way to do it. It's proposed by the GSN, and it's a little bit hacky. So let's talk about it, okay? So what happens is that the account proxy, so we'll send the command again, the Metatransactions via the proxy. The proxy will call out with the data in the command, but it will also append 20 bytes, which is the signer's address. And that will get sent to the DApp. Interestingly, the DApp will not process verify the user's signature, enforce replay protection, and then execute the command. And that's pretty damn invasive. We want to try to avoid this as much as we can. So the easiest way to avoid it is to have a simple proxy contract in the middle. So the meta transaction will go by the proxy contract. It'll check the signature, check the replay protection, and then call out to the DApp and then process the command. And now you can use message.sender because it's a proxy account. And a bunch of projects have already done this, which is fantastic, and we can reuse a lot of that out of the box for ourselves. Now, you may think as a DApp developer, well, I like message.sender, But I also want to support signage addresses. I can use message.sender, I could use the signage address, I don't care. There's a really easy way to do that. There is a way to do it that's proposed by the GSN and is a little bit hacky. So let's talk about it, okay? So what happens is that the account proxy, so we'll send the command again, the Metatransactions via the proxy. The proxy will call out with the data in the command, but it will also append 20 bytes, which is the signage address. And now it gets sent to the DAP. Interestingly, the DAP will not process.
Sorry for that. Okay, because your video has not been played entirely, so I have no idea.
I guess we can ask him to read the presentation and put it in YouTube or something.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay.
So it's all we have. It's all we have received. Yeah.